Today we're talking about what the Bible actually says about money and how to have a healthy relationship with it. So let's get started. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos on money, minimalism, our travel journey. We publish a new video every Friday, so please hit the subscribe button below. Before we go on, I just want to let you know that this isn't a video about health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not about that life. I don't believe that we follow Jesus just for the things that he provides to us. So that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, let's move on. Greed may be the root of all evil, but money is not the root of all evil. It's important to understand this often misquoted verse about money because it often leaves people in poverty and it leads people to idolatry. First, let's look at this infamous 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So we cannot forget to add the love in front, the love of money. That's the root of all evil. Money builds hospitals, church buildings, and homeless shelters. We shouldn't be anti-money, but we should be against the love of money. Money isn't evil on its own. Basically, no inanimate object that I can think of is evil on its own. It's the value we assign to it. It's what we assign to the object. Because an object is just an object. And objects can only become evil through our intentions. Take Exodus 32, for example, where they were worshiping the golden calf. Worshiping a golden cow is idolatry, sure. But a golden cow on its own is not an evil object. There's nothing evil about a golden calf until you start worshiping it. And it's the same way with money. What you do with it is what makes the difference. So how are people staying in poverty and getting into idolatry? Through misreading this verse. And actually, I don't think people are really misreading this verse because I don't think many people are reading it in the first place. I think we could all use, myself included, I think we could all use more time actually reading our Bible instead of just listening to what others are telling us, which is what leads to misquotes and things like this. So before we dive in too deep, let's get into some context on 1 Timothy 6:10. To get the proper context for anything in the Bible, you simply have to read the surrounding text. It's helpful to know who the audience was, who the author was, what the entire thing was about in the first place. But if nothing else, you have to read the surrounding text to figure out what the actual context is of the verse. So let's back up to verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. This entire verse was directed towards greedy rich people who love money. Plain and simple. If you love money, you become a slave to it, just like borrowers are slaves to lenders. And some people literally love money. Take Warren Buffett, for example. I've read a few biographies on Warren Buffett because I'm always interested to see how he thinks. And I don't maybe follow a lot of his moral practices, but his financial things, I'm interested just to see his insight into it. And he literally says, like he will tell you, that he loves money. He hoards money, actually. And he pretty much admits that without saying it straight up. The reason he still lives in the same house that he bought 50 years ago or whenever, and he's just made a little bit of additions to, but it's a very inexpensive house, and he has billions and billions of dollars, is because he would rather have money than almost anything else on earth. That's why he has so much money and investments just saved and stocked up. And maybe a lot of that led to his marital issues and everything else he's going through. Again, I'm not going to judge his life and where he's at with that, but that's just an example. He's willing, as one of the richest people in the world, to come out and say that he loves money. And we can see that hoarding mentality and the insecurities that he probably has, even though he has tens of billions of dollars, the insecurities are still there. So let's get into poverty and idolatry. It's a lot easier to make excuses about why you can't do something than to actually just do the thing. Excuses are really easy. All you have to do is say them, and it's easy to believe them, especially if you're the one saying them. And I think this is often why 1 Timothy 6:10 is misquoted, why it's misquoted so much. Because from a lazy standpoint, and I'm not calling anybody watching this lazy, but just from the lazy standpoint, it is easier to stay poor and to just not have money than it is to try to achieve financial independence, financial freedom, whatever. And over I've seen two main reasons why people stick with this money is evil mindset. Number one, They aren't sure if they're allowed to have money. If someone thinks obtaining money may be a sin when they read verses like Mark 10:25 about rich people not getting into heaven, they just stray away from taking that chance. It's easier just to not worry about quote unquote being rich than it is to try to become wealthy, or at least to gain some sort of financial freedom. Number two, they don't know what they're doing with their finances. That's probably most people. If someone can't make ends meet and doesn't want to reach out for help, it's easy to just stay where they are. They can stay poor and use a chopped up Bible verse to back themselves up if it's their choice. And sadly, a lot of these people are in mounds of debt, being a slave to the lender. They don't see an issue with that, but they say, oh, I can't be rich, or I can't have any sort of excess, because then I would be going against the Bible, which is not the case. So this can lead to idolatry, with the idol being like a spiritual safety net, or even their personal image with how people view them. And in the case of lazy theology, like the points given here, Paul speaks to that in Romans 14. Like when he refers to the vegetarian as being weak, not because they're vegetarian, not as if vegetarians are weak, but because of the reason that they are vegetarian, because they were just so concerned with what can I eat, and they wanted to eat meat, but they were afraid they were going to eat the wrong meat, so they just became a vegetarian. And Paul said, your heart's not in the right place. Like, you can't just cop out, and because maybe you're not allowed to eat certain things that were sacrificed to idols, so now you just don't eat anything because you're scared and you're living in that fear, so now you're a vegetarian. It's perfectly fine to be a vegetarian, but not for that reason, is what Paul's saying in Romans 14. So that same mindset kind of carries over into this whenever people are staying poor and they're actually staying in poverty, or they're staying in lots of debt, which is not necessarily what God wants for you either, just to avoid being rich. But what does rich mean? What does rich really mean? If you're an American with a job, you're most likely in the top 10% of the world as far as wealth is concerned. Does that mean you're rich? I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying it's something to consider. Are you rich when you own a $300,000 house? What about the person that owns a $200,000 house? Is he not as rich as the $300,000, so it's better? What about the $100,000 house? Where's the line? Once again, it's not a line, it's about a heart. It's about your heart. It comes back to the heart. So my point is, who are we to judge? I'm not trying to tell you that you're rich and that you're a bad person or anything like that. I'm just saying we have to know that it's difficult to judge, especially as Americans, because by worldly standards, we're rich. By American standards, maybe we're not. But really, the only standard that matters is God's standard and what's in our heart. So once again, we're going to go back to Paul, because he really lays out what I'm talking about the heart and all this stuff, whenever he talks about the circumcision of the heart. So here's Paul in Romans 2. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and the circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. So we go back to Mark 10:25, where they're talking about it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter heaven. Not only was Jesus most likely talking to wealthy people when he said that, but right after that, in that verse, he goes to explain how the things that aren't possible without God are possible with God. And I really feel like he was kind of saying that they were all rich, and comparatively speaking, but with God, all is possible. And then you take that into account with what Paul said in the verse that we just read, in the passage that we just read, and it's really a matter of your heart. It comes back to your heart. Your net worth doesn't determine whether you are rich or not. Your heart does. So money magnifies motives. That's what I like to say. Dave Ramsey says it like this: money makes you more of who you already are. So if you're greedy and you love money and you become wealthy or rich, then you're going to become a money hoarding, greedy person. Probably even more so because you have more money. But if you're a strong giver and you give a lot of your money and you care for others through your money and your finances, and you become wealthy or rich, then you're going to be a huge giver. and you're going to be you're going to start your own charity or something. Like, you're going to give a lot of money because it just makes you more of who you already are. Again, it's a heart issue. It's not a money issue. It's not about the specific dollar amount. So whatever you are, you plus money equals more of that. So that just means that you have to become who you want to be now. You don't want to wait until you're rich. Because whenever you do things like, maybe you don't give now, I'm not calling anybody out, but if you don't give now and you say, well, when I have more money, when I'm wealthy, I'll give. It doesn't work like that. If you're not giving now, you're most likely not going to give whenever you're wealthy. You have to start giving now. That often leads to receiving and blessings because God sees you being a good steward and wants to give you more money to work with. And then as you become more wealthy, you give more and more. I'm not saying any of this to make you feel guilty or to make you feel sad. So instead of getting the guilt trip or feeling sad about where you are right now, just use this as motivation to start thinking differently, to start thinking bigger, actually. So let's talk about the magic of thinking big. It's the title of a great book that I highly recommend that I will link below, The Magic of Thinking Big, and that's what kind of sparks this whole section of the video. It's apparent that a lot of people think big in the world. I mean, Elon Musk is a good example, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, who we talked about earlier. All these people think big, but what about the Christians? We need more Christians to think big, to think bigger for the kingdom, not just for themselves. It's actually really easy to think small as a Christian and to make it sound biblical or to make it sound really spiritual. But often it's just a lack of thinking big and not wanting to do stuff, honestly. So what's truly in your heart? Don't use the Christian excuse to think small. If you really want to think big, if you really want to do big things, what's truly in your heart? Christians who have thought big have accomplished some really amazing things. We've branched out into the world and been to hundreds of countries and brought people to Christ and have done amazing things and created hospitals and created homeless shelters and soup kitchens and all kinds of amazing things. Those things were done by Christians who were big thinkers. So here's a few more names for you. Billy Graham, C.S. Lewis, Paul the Apostle. These Christians had astronomical thinking. So while maybe they didn't create a multi-billion-dollar business or they didn't found Microsoft, it's apparent that they were big thinkers in a lot of ways, whether it be through their writings or their teachings or both. Personally, I would say that writing the majority of the New Testament probably trumps owning Microsoft or founding Microsoft. Sorry, Bill. And of course, a Christian owning a billion-dollar business could be an amazing thing for the kingdom. Like, I'm not saying that you should go do that, but I'm also saying that you shouldn't not do that. It could be a great thing. Like, that there are plenty of Christian businesses that do amazing things for the community, and they're just great businesses. I mean, look at Chick-fil-A, like, best customer service in the world. I don't know what's going on with that, but they're a Christian business. We can get into the arguments on opening on Sundays and all that stuff, and there's all kinds of stuff people don't like about Chick-fil-A, but they're a thriving Christian-run business. And they are doing great things. Okay, so now let's pull it all together. So money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. And that means ultimately that greed is the root of all evil, because that's what the love of money is. What separates a righteous person from an unrighteous person ultimately comes down to greed, not net worth or the price of their house or how much money they earn. We need to stop using the Bible as an excuse to stay poor, because a lot of people do. And if we want God to trust us with more money, we need to be good stewards of what He has given us already. If we're faithful in the little, He will be trusted with much. If you're going through financial issues right now and you want to take a step towards fixing it, fortunately I have lots of resources for you. Just go to freedomsprout.com and I have everything on there, from recommended books to get you started to a whole slew of articles that you can check out and get a lot of knowledge from with just the free articles. There's also plenty of other videos on money on this channel that you can check out. And ultimately, if it comes down to it, I do offer financial coaching on freedomsprout.com. You can just click on the financial coaching at the very bottom of the page in the menus, and we can get started with that if you want to. But just do something to improve your finances if you're having problems with your finances. Financial freedom is a great thing, and it's a great thing for the kingdom of God, I promise you. And before you go, please remember to subscribe to get more videos on money, minimalism, our travel journey around the world. If you are interested in hearing more about my perspective on money and mindset, and you want to raise intentional children, check out my new book, Intentional Children. I will put a link to that below. That is all for today. I will see you next week.